Across America, there are towns where clocks stopped decades ago. Streets frozen in time. Buildings left exactly as they were. Some were poisoned. Others abandoned overnight. A few simply ran out of money and never recovered. These are places the modern world forgot. Not all ghost towns are empty. Some still have people living among the ruins. At number 15 we have Centralia, Pennsylvania. In 1962, something went terribly wrong beneath this coal mining town. An underground coal seam caught fire during routine burning of trash. The fire spread through abandoned mine tunnels. Nobody could stop it. The ground became unstable. Toxic gases started leaking through cracks in the earth. The state tried everything to put out the Centralia fire, but nothing worked. The blaze kept spreading deeper underground. Families started getting sick from the fumes. Sinkholes opened without warning. By the 1980s, the government offered buyouts to everyone. Most people took the money and left. Buildings were demolished to prevent anyone from returning. Today, Centralia still burns beneath the surface. Only a handful of structures remain standing. Steam rises from cracks in empty roads. The fire could burn for another 250 years. A town erased by something nobody can see or stop. Time froze here the moment people realized they could never go home. The few remaining residents refused to leave despite the danger. They live in homes surrounded by nothing but memories and toxic smoke. Centralia exists as a warning of what happens when disasters become permanent. When the ground itself turns against the people living on it. When going back becomes impossible forever. Coming in at number 14 is Garnett, Montana. This was one of the biggest gold mining towns in the late 1800s. Thousands lived here during the boom years. Saloons, hotels, stores, and homes filled the mountain valley. But when the gold ran out, there was no reason to stay. Unlike other towns, people left slowly instead of all at once. Because Garnett emptied gradually. Nobody destroyed anything. Buildings stayed standing. Stores remained stocked. Homes kept their furniture. The town survived almost perfectly intact. People took what they could carry and simply walked away. They left behind dishes on tables, bottles behind bars, tools in workshops. Everything stayed exactly where it was. Today you can walk through Garnett and see life frozen in the 1890s. The cold, dry mountain air preserved everything. Wood buildings that should have rotted away still stand solid. Windows remain unbroken. Doors hang on their hinges. This is not a reconstruction or a museum display. This is a real town that simply stopped existing. Garnett sits high in the mountains, isolated and hard to reach. That isolation protected it from vandals and developers. Nobody tore it down because nobody bothered going there. The town survived by being forgotten. Now it offers one of the clearest windows into how mining towns actually functioned over a century ago. At number 13, we have Thurmond, West Virginia. This tiny railroad town once handled more freight revenue than New York and Cincinnati combined. Hard to believe looking at it now. Thurmond existed for one reason only: to move coal from nearby mines onto trains. The railroad built hotels, banks, and depots here despite the town being impossibly narrow. At its peak, trains arrived constantly. Workers loaded coal around the clock. The depot never closed. Money flowed through this remote valley town faster than much larger cities. But Thurmond was built on a single industry with no backup plan. When coal mining declined and railroads shifted routes, everything collapsed at once. The hotels closed within months. Banks left. Workers moved to towns with more opportunities. Today only 5 people live in Thurmond. 5 people in a town built for thousands. The train depot still stands exactly as it did. Empty storefronts line the tracks. Everything looks identical to the 1930s, because nothing changed after that. Thurmond never modernized, because it never had the chance. No highways were built here. No new businesses arrived. The valley is too narrow for expansion. The buildings that served coal trains a century ago are the same buildings standing today. Time stopped the moment the last profitable shipment left town and never started again. At number 12, we have Cairo, Illinois. This town sits where the Ohio and Mississippi rivers meet. That location made Cairo incredibly important for trade and transportation in the 1800s. It was supposed to become a major American city. People compared it to its Egyptian namesake. Investors poured money in expecting massive growth. But Cairo never reached that potential. Economic changes killed river trade. Railroads replaced steamboats. Flooding damaged the town repeatedly. Racial tensions drove people away. Population collapsed from 15,000 to barely 2,000. Yet here is what makes Cairo so eerie. The infrastructure for a much larger city still exists completely intact. Wide boulevards lead to nowhere. Large commercial buildings stand empty with windows broken. Parks have no visitors. Streetlights illuminate sidewalks. Nobody walks. Downtown Cairo looks post-apocalyptic. Entire blocks are abandoned. Historic buildings rot from the inside. The town built itself for a future that never came and cannot accept what it became. Cairo exists frozen between what it was and what it will never be. The grand vision remains visible in the oversized infrastructure, but the people needed to fill that vision are gone. What remains is a monument to failed expectations and dreams that died when rivers stopped being highways. Coming in at number 11 is Bodie, California. This gold mining town exploded in the late 1800s. Nearly 10,000 people lived here at the peak. Bodie was rough, violent, and incredibly wealthy. Mines pulled millions in gold from the ground. Saloons never closed. Gunfights happened daily. Then the ore ran out faster than anyone expected. Within a few years, Bodie was nearly empty. What makes this town special is how it was abandoned. People left quickly, but did not destroy anything. They locked their doors and walked away. Homes still have dishes on tables. Stores have merchandise on shelves. A schoolhouse has books open on desks, exactly where students left them. The state now preserves Bodie in arrested decay. That means nothing is restored, but nothing is removed either. Buildings are stabilized, so they do not collapse, but otherwise left exactly as found. Walking through Bodie feels like entering a time capsule. You see precisely what life looked like when mining towns thrived and died. The wooden buildings, the dusty streets, the saloons and churches, side by side. Furniture positioned as it was over a century ago. Personal belongings, abandoned in place. This is not a recreation. This is the real thing. Frozen the day prosperity died, and everyone left for richer strikes elsewhere. At number 10, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. This mountain town grew around silver mines and the railroad that served them. At its peak, nearly 2,000 people lived in St. Elmo. The main street had hotels, saloons, a telegraph office, and a general store. Everything a remote mining town needed to function completely isolated from the rest of America. Then the railroad rerouted to serve more profitable areas. Mining slowed as silver deposits ran thin. Residents left gradually over several decades, instead of all at once. But unlike most ghost towns, St. Elmo's buildings survived intact. The general store still stands with original goods inside gathering dust. The hotel remains complete with furniture. Many structures look like they could open for business tomorrow. The town layout has not changed since the early 1900s. Streets run the same paths. Buildings occupy the same lots. Even the storefronts look ready for customers who will never come. St. Elmo sits at over 10,000 feet elevation, where thin cold air preserved everything. Today you can walk the same streets. Miners walked after long shifts underground. See the same storefronts where they bought supplies. Stand in the same hotel lobbies where they paid for beds. It is one of the best preserved ghost towns in America. A place where time genuinely stopped and never restarted. Coming in at number 9 is Kennecott, Alaska. This was not a town that grew naturally over time. It was built by a corporation to house workers for a massive copper mine. The company constructed everything at once in one of the most remote locations imaginable. Housing, offices, hospitals, power plants, even a recreation hall for entertainment. Thousands worked here in brutal isolation. The nearest city was hundreds of miles away. Supplies came by ship and rail through treacherous terrain. Workers endured long, dark winters and dangerous conditions. But the copper was so valuable, it justified everything. Then in 1938, the ore played out. The mine closed immediately without warning. The company told everyone to leave. Workers abandoned everything they could not carry on the journey out. The remote location and dry climate preserved the buildings almost perfectly. Today, Kennecott looks like everyone left last week instead of nearly 90 years ago. You can still see machinery in the mill exactly where it stopped. Furniture fills the bunkhouses. Equipment sits in the workshops. This is a complete company town left exactly where it stood. No vandalism, no decay, just an entire industrial operation frozen mid-shift. Kennicott shows what happens when a town built for one purpose loses that purpose overnight and becomes economically worthless. At number 8 we have Ruby, Arizona. This mining town sits just miles from the Mexican border in the middle of absolute nowhere. Ruby existed solely to extract minerals from the ground and ship them out. When the ore played out completely, the economy died instantly. There was nothing else keeping people in this harsh desert location. Unlike boom towns that collapsed overnight in chaos, Ruby faded slowly and quietly. Families left one by one over many years as opportunities disappeared. The schoolhouse taught its last class to just a handful of children. The jail held its last prisoner. The company store sold its last supplies. Buildings emptied gradually, but stayed standing through it all. Today you can walk through an intact mining town that simply ran out of reasons to exist. The schoolhouse desks remain. The jail cells stand empty. The store counters wait for customers. Ruby shows the difference between abandonment and destruction. Nobody burned it down. Nobody tore it apart for salvage. People just stopped living there. The structures remain as evidence of a community that functioned for decades, then quietly disappeared when the money stopped flowing from underground. Ruby died with dignity instead of violence. It faded rather than exploded. Now it waits in the desert as proof that not all endings are dramatic. Coming in at number 7 is Pitcher, Oklahoma. This town was once the center of American lead and zinc mining. Pitcher produced metals for bullets, batteries, and construction during both world wars. Thousands worked in the mines beneath the town. Money flowed. Families built lives. Nobody imagined the disaster growing invisibly underground and in the soil. Decades of mining created contamination nobody anticipated. The ground became saturated with toxic metals. Chat piles, enormous mountains of mining waste, surrounded Pitcher completely. Lead contamination reached dangerous levels. Children tested positive for lead poisoning at alarming rates. Sinkholes opened as underground tunnels collapsed without warning. The earth itself became poisonous. The Environmental Protection Agency declared the entire area too contaminated for human habitation. The government bought out nearly everyone. Families took the money and left their homes forever. Buildings were demolished to prevent people from returning. Today, Pitcher is mostly empty fields, warning signs, and a few structures remaining as reminders of what happened. This town died not from economic collapse, but from poisoning itself through its own industry. Pitcher killed itself slowly, without realizing, until too late. The wealth extracted from the ground came with a price nobody calculated. Now time is frozen here, not by nostalgia, but by toxicity that will last generations. At number 6 we have Rhyolite, Nevada. In 1904, prospectors found gold in the hills. Within 2 years, Rhyolite had 10,000 residents living in the desert. The town built a stock exchange, opera house, electric lights, concrete sidewalks, even ice delivered daily. Everyone thought Rhyolite would become a permanent city rivaling San Francisco. Investors poured money in. Buildings went up fast, using concrete and steel to show permanence. Banks opened. Newspapers printed daily. The future looked unlimited. Then the gold ran out faster than anyone expected. Ore quality dropped. Mines closed. By 1910, most people had left. By 1920, Rhyolite was completely abandoned and silent. The boom lasted barely 6 years. Today the concrete ruins remain standing in the desert. You can see the bank building with its vault, the train depot platform, the bottle house made from thousands of beer bottles. These structures show how quickly prosperity can vanish when it is built on limited resources and unlimited optimism. Rhyolite is a monument to boom and bust economics. Fortunes were made and lost in less than a decade. A town built for permanence died before most of its buildings aged. The ruins stand as proof that American optimism sometimes builds things that cannot possibly last no matter how solid they look. Coming in at number 5 is Glen Rio, straddling the Texas and New Mexico border. This town exists in both states at once, split down the middle by the state line. Glen Rio thrived for one reason only: Route 66. The highway brought endless traffic through town every single day. Gas stations, motels, and diners served travelers driving across America to California. Business owners made good money from the constant flow of cars. Families built lives around serving travelers. The future seemed secure as long as people drove Route 66. Then Interstate 40 opened, bypassing Glen Rio completely. Traffic disappeared literally overnight. Without cars stopping, every single business failed within months. There was no backup economy. Gas stations closed, and pumps went dry. Motels emptied and never filled again. Diners served their last meals to the few locals remaining. Within a few years, Glen Rio was abandoned. The buildings remain along the old highway like tombstones, marking where America used to drive before faster roads made the old route obsolete. Today you can still see the motel signs faded by decades of sun. The gas pumps rusted in place. The diner counters waiting for customers. Everything a Route 66 town needed to survive. But highways changed, and Glen Rio was left behind. Time stopped here the day the interstate opened, and nobody had a reason to exit. At number 4 we have Calico, California. This silver mining town boomed in the 1880s. When ore prices were high, over 1,200 mines operated around Calico at the peak. The town had everything miners needed to survive in the harsh desert: saloons, general stores, a newspaper, even a Chinatown district for immigrant workers. Then silver prices crashed hard. Within a few years, Calico was abandoned completely. Unlike most ghost towns, this one was partially restored in the 1950s. Walter Knott, founder of Knott's Berry Farm, bought Calico and rebuilt some structures for tourists. Today it exists as an attraction that is part authentic history and part reconstruction. But even with restoration, Calico still shows the layout and limitations of a 19th century mining town. You can walk the same narrow streets miners walked between shifts. See how tightly packed the buildings were. Understand how harsh life was in these remote desert camps, with no modern comforts or conveniences. Restoration preserved the bones of Calico, even if some flesh was added back later. It remains a town where time stopped when silver became worthless, then was partially rewound for visitors decades later. The result is a strange mix of authentic history and tourist-friendly recreation occupying the same space. Coming in at number 3 is Jerome, Arizona. This copper mining town sits on a steep mountain slope, overlooking the Verde Valley. At its peak, 15,000 people lived in Jerome, packed into impossibly steep terrain. Mines produced millions in copper for decades. Money flowed. The future looked secure. Then the mines closed in 1953 without warning. The population crashed to barely 50 people almost overnight. Jerome nearly became a complete ghost town. Buildings were abandoned where they stood. Homes emptied. Businesses closed permanently. The steep slope made demolition difficult and expensive, so most structures just stayed there slowly decaying. But something unexpected happened that saved Jerome from total abandonment. Instead of tearing everything down and rebuilding modern structures, Jerome preserved what existed. The town kept its historic buildings, its narrow winding streets, its mining-era character completely intact. New residents moved in slowly and restored individual buildings while keeping their original appearance. The layout never changed from the mining days. Today Jerome has around 450 residents living among structures from the copper boom. The buildings remain largely original. The streets follow the same impossible angles. Walking through Jerome feels like visiting the 1950s preserved in desert air. It is a town that accepted its past instead of trying to erase it and start over. At number 2 we have Terlingua, Texas. This mercury mining town sits near Big Bend in one of the most isolated parts of America. Mercury was essential for processing gold and silver, making Terlingua valuable despite its remote location. The Chisos Mining Company ran everything and controlled every aspect of life here for workers and their families. When mercury prices dropped and mining ended, the company left immediately. Workers abandoned Terlingua in the 1940s. The harsh desert climate preserved the ruins almost perfectly. Adobe buildings, mining equipment, the company store, all remain standing exactly as left. Today Terlingua has a small population but lacks modern infrastructure in many areas still. Parts of town still look exactly like they did when miners walked away over 80 years ago. What makes Terlingua unique is its extreme isolation. No major highways pass through. No large cities nearby. The harsh desert surroundings prevented modern development from swallowing the old town completely the way it happened elsewhere. Terlingua exists as a place where the 1940s never really ended, because nothing arrived to replace them. The isolation that made mining difficult also preserved what miners left behind. Time froze here not by choice but by geography that keeps the modern world at a distance. But number 1 is where everything changes. Virginia City, Montana. During the 1860s, this was one of the wealthiest towns in America. Gold from the Alder Gulch strike made Virginia City boom harder than almost anywhere else. At its peak, over 10,000 people lived here. Theaters, newspapers, breweries, even a Masonic temple rose from the frontier. Virginia City was so important, it became the territorial capital of Montana. Fortunes were made overnight in the gulches. The town built substantial brick and stone buildings, expecting to last forever. Then the gold ran out. Population collapsed dramatically. By 1900, only a few hundred people remained. Virginia City should have become ruins, like so many others. But something remarkable happened. The town retained almost all of its 19th century buildings. The street layout stayed identical. Public spaces were preserved. Nobody tore down the old structures to build modern replacements. Today, Virginia City exists as one of the most complete examples of an 1860s mining town still standing anywhere in America. You can walk the same boardwalks miners walked after finding gold, enter the same saloons where fortunes were celebrated, visit the same courthouse where justice was delivered, see the same opera house where entertainment happened. The buildings are original, not reconstructions. This is not a theme park or movie set. This is an actual American town, frozen in time.